Hello my dear friends, and welcome back to another video. So today we have a range of Star Wars news, not just pertaining to the Ahsoka show, but we're gonna start with Skeleton Crew. A new listing for US copyright has stated Skeleton Crew's approximate release date is January 2024. Now if this is true, that would mean just a 3-month wait between Star Wars projects, which would be a fan dream. Unfortunately, my dear friends, I don't think this is the case. This is just for filing reasons. January the 1st is way too convenient. It's just for legal reasons. I would love for this to be the case, but as some have pointed out, this could just be for filing, for copyright filing. According to Bespin Bulletin and Making Star Wars, two very reliable sources, Skeleton Crew's not going to be until November or December of 2024, not January. We're going to have to wait for Disney to confirm. But we do have a brand new fascinating synopsis that seems to more or less confirm theories that we're going to return to Peridea sooner rather than later. And in this way, Skeleton Crew is going to be what the Book of Boba Fett was for The Mandalorian Seasons 2 and 3, a bridging point between Ahsoka Season 1 and Ahsoka Season 2. And as you're about to see, the kids in Skeleton Crew, as well as Jude Law's character, could be Ahsoka and Sabine's way home. This is what they say. Description of the work. In the first episode of the Skeleton Crew show, we're introduced to 4 kids who make a mysterious discovery on their seemingly safe home planet and get lost in a strange and dangerous galaxy. Now this could just be the known galaxy, and to them it's strange and dangerous, but the wording sounds like it's going to be a new one, and this mysterious discovery could be a portal of sorts, maybe an infinity gate. The synopsis goes on to say, finding their way home, meeting unlikely allies and enemies, will be a greater adventure than they ever imagined. I'm hoping they do end up finding Ahsoka and Sabine on Peridea, and more adventures take place there, because that also means more Shin, who is now the leader of an army of bandits. I'd love to know where her story goes. I've got a crazy proposition, because unlike Baylan, they've not given us much to understand what's going to happen to her next. Some fans are still adamant she's going to have to side with Ahsoka and Sabine. But what if she becomes a rogue Ronin? One who just follows the will of the Force and her own instincts, which could be very dangerous. She never finished her training with Baylan, and given we know she's very aggressive by nature, if she forges her own path in the Force, she could become very powerful, eventually completely going dark. I called it right from the start. She's going down a Maul route. After being abandoned by her master, she's gonna form her own group, become a master in her own right, with her own ways of doing things, without the label of Sith, or dark side user, or even dark Jedi. We know the way Filoni works. This could be something massive. Some believe the reason she didn't take Ahsoka's hand is because she doesn't believe in herself just yet. She doesn't think she's worthy. And Baylan once said, she was trained for so much more. They never told us what he meant by that. Is it possible Baylan wanted to use her as a vessel, maybe for Abeloth, or another iteration of the Ones? Now I know Disney and Lucasfilm probably aren't going to use this idea, but imagine if Shin is the big bad of the Rey movie further down the timeline. She would make for an awesome villain. A lot of her story still has to be told before that time period though. But at Star Wars Celebration, I got the impression that the various directors of the upcoming films, whether you're talking about Dave, or James Mangold, or Sharmino Obaid-Chinoy, implied an ongoing thread that connects all 3 of them, despite taking place at 3 very different points in Star Wars history. And so now, let's talk about Ahsoka's viewership. So as you're probably aware, the Nielsen ratings are a bit behind, but they are still coming in, and they measure minutes watched. Now I'm going to try and cover this as a matter of fact. I'm not going to be hyperbolic one way or another. I've seen some fans say, this is the end of the world, this is terrible, Ahsoka flopped. No, let's just take a step back, take a breather, and analyze this data for what it is. So now we're looking at the 3rd week, which was Ahsoka episode 4. I've covered the first 2 weeks, but for this one, Ahsoka dropped in the ratings. 17th in overall, and 7th for original streaming series. It may not be great for the Ahsoka show, however, keep in mind that minutes watched is also directly correlated to how long the episode that week was. And Ahsoka episode 4 was on the shorter end of runtimes when you compare it to other Star Wars series at the same point. But despite this, it still beats some in terms of overall minutes watched. Let me explain. Ahsoka's 4th episode was 34 minutes and 44 seconds in length, garnering for that week, which also takes into account other episodes of the show that fans watched in the 7-day period, 459 million minutes watched, on par with the Book of Boba Fett's third week episode, which garnered 467 million minutes watched. The fourth episode of Ahsoka fell short of Kenobi, but it did do better than the Andor show in week 3. So for those saying it did worse than Andor, that's not really true. And it's rather arduous and I would say benign to juxtapose these various Star Wars shows because they were under different circumstances. For example, minutes watched per week also depends on how many episodes were out by that point. For example, some shows had a 2-episode premiere, whereas Andor started with 3. And just like the Andor show, numbers skyrocketed in the last 2. I suspect even though the first 4 episodes of Ahsoka maybe didn't do as well as forecasted, I'm sure episodes 5 to 8 do have a higher viewership. But there is something to be said about maybe the Ahsoka show being a bit more niche. If you didn't see the Clone Wars and Rebels, if we're being real, it's hard to deny this one was not as easy as, say, The Mandalorian to follow from the start, or to have the same emotional weight. Ezra coming home, the name drop of Kanan Jarrus, but in a way, the Ahsoka show was designed for those same fans afterwards to stay on the Disney Plus platform and catch up on those aforementioned episodes of the various animated series. Disney and Lucasfilm may have realised, hey, this could be a great way to keep customers on our streaming service to learn more. And I will just say in retrospect, now that all is said and done, some of the cast and crew made early claims that you don't have to have seen any of the animated shows to understand Ahsoka going into it. I don't think that's the case, especially for certain scenes like the Balin ending with the Mortis gods. To those who've not seen the Clone Wars Season 3 or some of Star Wars Rebels Season 4 with a wolf and a door or the world between worlds, I think it's valid to ask how would they be expected to understand it. So I don't think we can ignore all of these factors when looking at the numbers, because there would have been fans who saw the first few and then decided, you know what, this is not for me. Nonetheless, as we've seen with other shows like Book of Boba and Kenobi, there's a lot of curiosity for the finale of Star Wars shows. I think in the back of people's minds, it stems from the 2020 Mandalorian Season 2 finale moment with Luke Skywalker. Since then, as a fandom, we've come to expect hard-hitting, big cameo sort of moments in the final episodes of these Disney Plus shows. Kenobi Episode 6 was another one, so as such, there will be a bit of a spike, I suspect, in the last episode, Part 8, the one that just finished airing. But next week, I'll be curious to see the Nielsen rating for Part 5, because even for fans who didn't see those episodes, if they're online, if they're chronically online, they would have heard of the Clone Wars flashbacks and the fan service moments, so let's wait and see. So now moving on to some other Star Wars news. David Gordon Green, executive producer and director, famous for his Halloween films, and most recently, Exorcist Believer, says he was in talks with Star Wars and Lucasfilm to make his own project in a galaxy far, far away. But unfortunately, he says there was never a good idea there. So it was just talks, nothing more. And it appears as though every couple of months, another director, another famous big-name director in Hollywood, comes forward and says, I was in talks to do something with Star Wars, but it never happened. And this goes back to a headline back in 2020 and 2021, I think it was late 2020 just as The Mandalorian Season 2 finished. After all those Star Wars projects were announced, there were articles claiming that Star Wars wanted to tap into some new genres. We've now seen that with Andor, we're going to see that likely with The Acolyte, but there were also talks of a horror project and even a Star Wars comedy, one which never came to fruition, thank goodness. But the talks Kathleen Kennedy had with David Gordon Green were likely related to the Star Wars horror project that people were talking about back then. I believe they probably abandoned the idea, but it'd be awesome if it was still in the cards. We heard about Guillermo del Toro's supposed Jabba the Hutt movie that was scrapped, and Star Wars would do so well to tap into that genre. Maybe some dark tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina, with the various aliens who live a life of scum and villainy. Or even better, maybe a project that connects to The Acolyte. In his conversation with Happy Sad Confused, here is the quote. Those kinds of meetings are fun, and I do know a lot about, at least the old Star Wars movies, and those are really fun, and a very strong part of my excitement as a kid watching those movies were those movies. And then, there is a very interesting bit where he calls out executives on these big franchises, saying they're going to look at him too skeptically. He says he knows what's out there, so maybe he was worried about the lack of creative freedom he would have if he were to make a Star Wars project. He's definitely heard of the experiences of some other directors who also never got to work on the franchise, despite being poised to. and he himself admits his impulses and creative decisions are, quote, pretty eccentric, maybe too much for a studio like Lucasfilm, which has a history of being rather rigid and not always willing to take risks, which I do think is a shame. But just like the Mangold movie exploring the origins of the Jedi, imagine if David Gordon Green explored the origins of the Sith. And so finally, my dear friends, Star Wars movies are going to begin airing on various Disney networks this month. The entire slate of live-action Star Wars films, 1 to 9, and the spin-offs Rogue One and Solo will start to feature on ABC, FX, and Freeform. Subscribers to the Disney Plus streaming service already have access to all the films, but now Disney is bringing them to other networks as well. I might be stretching just a little bit here when I say this could be related to Bob Iger's comments that he wants to bring focus and vigour back to the movie side of the Star Wars franchise. And this starts by reminding fans it's not just the series we're focusing on, especially as we build up to the year of production on the upcoming Rey film. But share your thoughts on everything we spoke about in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give me a big fat thumbs up, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next video. May the Force be with you, always.